The phantom cartographer. They laughed at his name for decades, until they found the maps no one should have drawn. Imagine a dusty basement somewhere in Scotland, 2003. A librarian opens a wooden box forgotten for over 100 years. Inside, rolled in wax cloth stained with moisture, are dozens of hand-drawn maps. Maps of places that, officially, had not yet been discovered. Maps of routes that didn't exist. Maps signed by a man whose name was deliberately erased from historical records. What you're about to discover isn't just the story of a forgotten cartographer. It's the story of how truth can be buried by those who fear what it reveals. And how, sometimes, the past finds a way to resurface, no matter how hard they try to silence it. In the late 19th century, in a small coastal village in Scotland, a man named Alistair Crowmond worked as a navigation assistant in a busy port. He had no formal education. He didn't attend universities. He didn't belong to any geographical or academic society. He was just another dock worker, someone who carried maps and navigation records for merchant ship captains. His colleagues called him the Shadow, because he lived in the corners, always watching, always jotting something down in tattered notebooks he carried with him. No one paid attention to him. No one imagined that, in silence, he was creating something that would challenge everything historians believed they knew about the age of great navigation. Alistair drew maps. Not ordinary maps, copied from official records. He drew maps that showed uncatalogued islands, secret maritime passages, ocean currents that would only be officially studied decades later. And most disturbing of all, he drew routes connecting continents in ways that only experienced navigators knew, routes that were never published, never shared, never admitted. How could a man without training, without access to laboratories or expeditions, know these things? How could he draw the outline of regions that European powers insisted were still being explored? Official records from that time mention him only 3 times. Always briefly. Always dismissively. In 1887, a logbook from a British merchant ship mentions the scribbler, who tried to sell maps to the captain at Aberdeen port. The captain refused, calling him a charlatan. In 1891, a local newspaper article makes a sarcastic mention of a madman who claims to have mapped secret routes to the Arctic. In 1894, there's a note in a police record about a man detained for creating fraudulent navigation documents. The name isn't complete. Just Crowmond. After that, nothing. No death record. No grave. No mention. As if he had been deliberately erased. And for over a century, no one cared. No one searched. No one questioned. Until that box was opened in 2003. The maps were there, preserved almost miraculously, protected from time and moisture. When the librarian took them for analysis to the University of Edinburgh, historians laughed. Another 19th-century lunatic, they thought. Another one of those armchair adventurers who drew fantasies. But then they began comparing the maps with modern navigation records. And that's when everything changed. Alistair Crowmond's maps were correct. Frighteningly correct. He had drawn with millimetric precision the outline of islands in the North Atlantic that were only officially mapped in the 1920s. He had marked ocean currents that were only scientifically confirmed in the 1950s. He had traced navigation routes that, according to historical records, were only discovered decades after his supposed death. And even more disturbing, he had drawn strange symbols in certain regions of the maps, symbols no one could decipher, symbols that seemed to indicate something hidden, something forbidden, something that shouldn't be found. One of the historians responsible for the initial analysis of the maps, Dr. Malcolm Hendry, gave an interview in 2005 that was never widely publicized. In that interview, he admitted something disturbing. He said that when studying Crowmond's maps, he found evidence that the cartographer had access to documents that should have been locked in the British Admiralty archives. Classified documents. Documents about secret expeditions. Expeditions that were never officially recognized. Expeditions that, according to the British government of the time, never happened. Hendry suggested that Crowmond wasn't a madman. He was someone who knew too much. And that's why he was silenced. But how did he gain access to this information? The most accepted theory is that Alistair worked at the port during the height of British imperialism, a time when merchant ships, military vessels, and exploration ships circulated constantly. He would have had contact with sailors, captains, explorers. He would have heard stories. He would have seen documents. He would have copied information. But that doesn't explain everything. Because some of Crowmond's maps show places that, according to official records, no human had visited until decades later. How could he draw the precise outline of an Arctic island if no British ship had reached there? How could he mark the exact location of a shipwreck that was only discovered in 1973? Here's the part no one wants to admit. There are two possibilities. The first is that Alistair Crowmond was an absolute genius, capable of deducing complex geographies just through oral accounts and fragments of information. The second is that he had access to knowledge that was deliberately hidden. Knowledge about secret expeditions. About discoveries that were never published. About clandestine trade routes. About activities that European powers didn't want the world to know. And if this second possibility is true, it means the history we were taught about the age of navigation is incomplete. It means there are intentional gaps. It means someone decided what we could know and what should remain hidden. In 2007, a team of historians tried to trace Alistair Crowmond's life through civil records, birth certificates, marriage records, anything. They found almost nothing. There's a baptism record from 1851 in a small church in Aberdeen. There's a mention of his name in an 1881 census. After that, he disappears from records as if he never existed. No death certificate. No burial record. No will. No registered property. It's as if, from a certain point, someone had systematically erased any evidence of his existence. And when historians tried to access the British Admiralty archives to check if there were mentions of him in official documents, they discovered that several documents from that era had been reclassified as confidential. Documents that should be public. Documents that, suddenly, could no longer be accessed. Why? What was in those documents that justified keeping them secret more than a century later? What did Alistair Crowmond know that was so dangerous it needed to be buried with him? One of the maps found in the box shows a maritime route between Scotland and Greenland. On that route, Crowmond drew a series of small islands. Next to them, he wrote a phrase in Latin, hic sunt non redirent. Here are those who did not return. When geologists compared the map with modern satellite images, they discovered the islands really exist. And in 2011, an archaeological expedition found, on one of those islands, the remains of a human encampment. Tools. Campfire remains. Fabric fragments. Carbon dating indicated the camp was used sometime between 1880 and 1900. Exactly the time when Alistair was drawing his maps. But there was no record of any official British expedition to that region at that time. None. So who was there? And why didn't anyone come back? The truth is that official history is written by those who win, by those who have power, by those who decide what deserves to be remembered. Alistair Crowmond had no power. No voice. No influence. So it was easy to dismiss him, ridicule him, erase him. But the maps remained. And now, more than a century later, they're forcing historians to ask questions again that they thought they'd already answered. They're revealing that maybe we don't know as much about our past as we believe. They're showing that there are secrets buried in the margins of history, waiting to be discovered. Today, Alistair Crowmond's maps are in a protected room at the National Library of Scotland. They're not on public display. They're not widely publicized. When you ask why, they say it's for preservation. But there are historians who believe it's because there are things in those maps that are still sensitive. Still dangerous. Still reveal something that someone, somewhere, doesn't want revealed. And the question that remains is simple. If a man without education, without resources, without recognition, managed to see and record things that should have been hidden, how many others like him existed? How many other truths have been buried? How many other maps are waiting in forgotten boxes, in dusty basements, in locked archives, ready to rewrite everything we thought we knew? Alistair Crowmond died alone, ignored, ridiculed. But his maps survived. And maybe that's all that matters. Because the truth, no matter how hard they try to bury it, always finds a way to resurface. Always. If this made you question what else is hidden in the shadows of history, maybe you're starting to see. Subscribe, because there are still many stories that should never have been forgotten.